I'm a 27-year-old woman, and up until recently, I still lived at home with my parents. Not by choice. If it were up to me, I would have been out of there years ago. But every time I tried to save money and make a plan, they found a way to keep me stuck. They controlled everything: my money, my time, my personal space. I had to be strategic if I wanted to escape. I had a full-time job, but it never felt like my money. My parents insisted that I contribute most of my paycheck to family expenses, or rent, utilities, groceries, except I never saw any of the bills. The numbers never added up. I'd give them almost everything, and they'd still complain about how we were barely making it. Meanwhile, my dad always had a new gadget, and my mom constantly went shopping. When I asked where all the money was going, I got the same response: "You don't need to worry about that. Just do your part." Privacy didn't exist. My mom would go through my room when I wasn't home. If she found anything she didn't like, a book, a gift from a friend, even receipts, she'd confront me about it. My phone wasn't my phone. They made me share my passcode in case of emergencies, but they used it to go through my texts, check my call log, and scroll through my social media. My dad once printed out my bank statements and highlighted suspicious purchases. He called me into the living room, waved the papers in my face, and demanded to know why I spent money at a coffee shop when I was supposed to be saving. This was my life. Every move monitored, every decision questioned. But I had a plan. For the past 6 months, I had been secretly looking for an apartment. I found one that was small but perfect. The rent was reasonable, and best of all, it was mine. I signed the lease without telling them. I started slowly moving my things out. A few books here, some clothes there. If they noticed, they didn't say anything. My older brother, who moved out years ago and had gone no contact for a while, warned me. They're going to lose their minds when they find out. I believed him, but I wasn't prepared for how bad it would get. They found out before I had a chance to tell them. They went through my desk, found my lease agreement, and confronted me the second I walked through the door. My mom was crying. My dad was furious. "How could you do this? After everything we've done for you?" They made it sound like I was abandoning them. My mom clutched her chest dramatically, saying she couldn't handle the stress. My dad started listing off everything they had sacrificed for me. It wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. I told them I was moving out no matter what. That's when the manipulation hit a new level. Suddenly, my mom had a serious health condition that she conveniently never mentioned before. She needed my help. She couldn't survive without me. I wanted to believe her, but when I texted my brother about it, he immediately called me. "She's lying," he said. "She pulled the same stunt when I left." I told them I wasn't changing my mind. That's when my dad called my job, without my knowledge, and told them I would be taking time off to help with a family emergency. I only found out because my boss pulled me aside, confused, asking if everything was okay. I was livid. They were trying to cut me off from everything: my money, my independence, even my job. That was the moment I knew I had to leave immediately. I packed my essentials while they were out. I had planned to do it slowly, but that was no longer an option. I had a friend on standby, ready to help me move out in the middle of the night. When my parents came home and saw my half-empty room, they lost it. They staged a full intervention. They called extended family, made me sit in the living room while everyone lectured me about how selfish I was, how I was breaking my mother's heart, how no good daughter would abandon her parents like this. But I didn't budge. They yelled. They cried. They called me ungrateful, a traitor, crazy. They said I was making a huge mistake, that I'd regret it, that I needed them. I left at 2 a.m. with my friend. I didn't tell them where I was going. I didn't answer their calls. That first night in my apartment, I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes. The place was quiet. No one was checking my phone. No one was monitoring my spending. No one was going through my stuff. For the first time in my life, I was free. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The first few days in my new apartment felt unreal. No one barging into my room. No one questioning my spending. No sudden family meetings to guilt trip me. The silence was strange at first, but I got used to it fast. I started settling in, unpacking what little I had brought, buying groceries without someone monitoring my receipts, and just breathing. The apartment was small, but it was mine. Then, the calls started. Hundreds of them. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages, every single one from my parents. The first few were demands. "Come home right now. We need to talk." Then came the guilt. "You're breaking your mother's heart. She can't sleep. She hasn't eaten." Then the anger. "You're ungrateful. You've been brainwashed." It didn't stop. Every hour. Every day. My phone would buzz nonstop. I blocked their numbers. That's when the unknown numbers started calling. Blocked those too. The emails came next. I ignored everything. For the first time in my life, I had control over who could reach me. I thought they'd give up eventually. I underestimated them. They found me anyway. A few nights later, I heard knocking. Not a normal knock. Pounding. Over and over again. I looked through the peephole. My parents. They found my apartment. I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, hoping they'd leave. They didn't. The knocking got louder. My dad's voice boomed through the door. He told me to open up. My mom was crying. I stayed quiet. Minutes passed. They weren't leaving. They were trying to get in. The doorknob rattled. My dad pushed against the door, testing if it would budge. My heart pounded. I had locked everything, but the way they were pushing, like they expected me to give in, sent a chill through me. Then came the screaming. My mom wailed like she was in pain. She said she was having a heart attack. She begged me to open up, just for a second, so she could sit down. My dad banged the door again. My mom sobbed that she needed help. I didn't buy it. She pulled this before. When my brother moved out. When she wanted me to stay home from work. When she needed to win an argument. Still, they wouldn't stop. After almost an hour of this, my neighbors came out. A few people peeked into the hallway, whispering to each other. I felt trapped. My own parents were causing a scene outside my home. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The police arrived. I stayed by the door, listening as my parents kept up the act. When the police finally arrived, I heard my mom's sobbing switch from dramatic to controlled. The second she saw the officers, she turned into a helpless, heartbroken mother. She told them she was just here because she was worried about me, that I had run away from home and cut off all contact. She painted herself as the victim. The officers knocked on my door. I took a deep breath and opened it. I explained everything. I was 27, I moved out on my own, and my parents were harassing me. I told them about the endless calls, the fake emergency, and how they had been banging on my door for nearly an hour. One of the officers turned to my parents and asked them to leave. My dad lost it. He yelled that I was being manipulated, that I wasn't thinking straight. My mom clutched her chest again, saying she just needed to see her daughter's face. The officers weren't having it. I was an adult. I was safe. I told them I didn't want my parents here, and that was enough. They were told to leave. They didn't go quietly. As they walked away, my dad shouted that I was a horrible daughter, that I was being controlled by someone. My mom sobbed that I had abandoned my family. I shut the door and locked it. The aftermath, my friends couldn't believe it when I told them what happened. They were horrified. One of them offered to stay over just in case. Another told me I needed to change my locks. That's when the Facebook posts started. My parents went public. They made a long, dramatic post about their ungrateful daughter who abandoned her sick mother and blocked her entire family. They painted me as heartless, reckless, and possibly brainwashed. The comments were flooded with support from family members, from their friends, from people I barely even knew. My inbox exploded with messages. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some demanded an explanation. Others told me I needed to apologize. A few just sent guilt-trippy paragraphs about family always sticking together. I ignored all of it. My brother was the only one who had my back. He told me this was exactly what happened when he left, that my parents were using the same playbook, that I did the right thing. I started doubting myself. I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I should have at least talked to them. But then I remembered the door shaking, the screaming, the manipulation. No, I made the right choice. But I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. I thought blocking their numbers and ignoring their Facebook meltdown would be enough to make them stop. I was wrong. It started small. I noticed I wasn't getting important mail bills, bank statements, even a new debit card I had ordered. At first, I thought it was just delays. Then I got an email notification about a credit card application I had never made. The address on the application? My parents' house? They were trying to open a credit card in my name. I immediately called the bank, reported it as fraud, and had them shut it down before anything went through. I froze my credit and put an alert on all my accounts. I thought that would be the end of it. Again, I underestimated them. A few days later, my boss called me into her office. She looked concerned. I had no idea why until she told me someone had emailed HR claiming I was mentally unstable, that I had run away from home and needed to be watched carefully. It was my dad. He had written a long, dramatic email warning them that I was in a bad mental state and that my family was worried for my safety. He even hinted that my employer should intervene. I sat there, staring at my boss, trying to process it. I had to explain everything, that my parents were controlling, that I had moved out to escape them, that this was another one of their desperate attempts to force me back. My boss listened, then nodded. She said HR was already skeptical because the email was weirdly aggressive, but she wanted to check with me before ignoring it. I was lucky. My job had my back. But the fact that my parents were now trying to sabotage my career, that changed everything. I called my parents. I knew they would deny it, but I wanted them to hear me say it. I knew what they were doing. The second my mom picked up, she started crying. My dad took over, acting offended that I was accusing them of such things. They had no idea what I was talking about. Maybe I was confused. Maybe someone else was trying to steal my identity. Maybe my boss misunderstood the email. Lies on top of lies. I cut them off mid-sentence. I told them if they kept interfering in my life, I would press charges. Silence. Then, the excuses started. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were just protecting me from making a mistake. They were only reaching out because they loved me. I hung up. The next day, they doubled down on their social media campaign. Now, I wasn't just an ungrateful daughter who abandoned her sick mother. I was brainwashed and mentally unstable. They made vague posts about how they were losing their daughter to outside influences and that they wouldn't stop fighting for her. Family members started calling me non-stop. My aunt left a voicemail saying I needed to go home and fix this before it's too late. A cousin messaged me, telling me to at least talk to them and hear them out. I blocked every single one of them. I wasn't playing their game. I started researching restraining orders. I wasn't sure if their behavior qualified, but I needed to know my options. I also went to my bank and changed every security question and PIN. I added extra verification steps to everything: utilities, insurance, my lease, even my phone provider. If they tried anything else, I wanted to be ready. Then I went to my apartment manager and asked if anyone had tried to access my mailbox. That's when I learned someone had been asking about my mail. A concerned family member had come by a few days earlier, asking if they could pick it up for me. They didn't give the mail to them, but the fact that my parents had tried, that sent a clear message. They weren't done. My boss reassured me that my job was safe. HR had dismissed my dad's email as nonsense. That was one win. But this was bigger than just controlling parents. They weren't just trying to guilt me. They were trying to ruin my life. They were trying to trap me. And I had no idea what they were going to do next. I was finally starting to feel like I had control over my life. My job was safe, my apartment was secure, and I had locked down my finances. I knew my parents wouldn't stop trying to get to me, but I had taken every precaution to cut them off. Then they showed up at my job. It was a normal workday. I was at my desk when a Slack notification popped up from the front desk receptionist. "Your parents are here asking for you." I stared at the message. I had never told them where I worked. There was no way they could have known unless someone told them, or unless they found out on their own. Another message popped up. Should I let them up? They say it's urgent. I felt a rush of panic. I typed back quickly. No, I'm coming down. I walked as calmly as I could to the lobby. The second I stepped out of the elevator, I saw them. My dad stood tall, arms crossed, looking angry but controlled. My mom sat on one of the lobby chairs, pretending to look weak and frail. The second she saw me, she perked up like she had been waiting for this moment. The receptionist looked between me and them, clearly unsure what to do. She had probably assumed they were here for a normal family visit, not an ambush. Before I could speak, my mom got up, rushing toward me like she hadn't seen me in years. My dad followed behind her, walking with the confidence of someone who thought they were in control. I took a step back, but they kept coming. My mom started begging. She said I needed to stop this nonsense and come home, that I wasn't thinking clearly, that I had made my point, and now it was time to come back where I belonged. My dad didn't bother with guilt. He went straight to demands. He told me to stop pretending I was an adult, that I was coming home today. I didn't respond. I just told them to leave. That's when my mom collapsed onto one of the lobby couches, holding her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. People started looking. She wailed about how I had lost my mind, that she didn't recognize me anymore, that someone had manipulated me into turning against my family. The receptionist, clearly uncomfortable, quietly stepped away and made a call. My dad didn't budge. He kept pushing, saying they were just concerned parents trying to help their daughter, that I was making a huge mistake. Then security arrived. 2 uniformed security guards approached, glancing between me and my parents. One of them asked what was going on. My mom shot up from the couch, switching from grief to outrage in seconds. She told them they were just worried parents who had come to take their daughter home where she belonged. My dad demanded that they escort me out of the building and send me home with them immediately. The guards turned to me, waiting for my response. I told them the truth, that I was 27, that my parents had been harassing me since I moved out, that I had already called the police on them once. The security guards nodded and turned back to my parents, telling them they needed to leave. They didn't listen. My mom started crying again, saying she just needed 5 minutes alone with me. My dad refused to move, insisting they had a right to be here. That's when my boss stepped out of the elevator. She took one look at the situation, my parents refusing to leave, my mom crying on a couch, security standing between us, and then turned to me. She asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Do you want me to call the cops?" My dad finally snapped. His entire calm act disappeared in an instant. He pointed straight at me, his face red with anger, and shouted, "You're nothing without us." The entire lobby went silent. The security guard stepped in immediately, grabbing his arm and moving him toward the door. My mom, still sobbing, ran after him, pleading for one more chance to talk to me. The last thing I heard before the doors shut behind them was my dad yelling that I was throwing my life away. I stood there, frozen. The receptionist avoided eye contact. The security guards shook their heads. My boss let out a long sigh and looked at me. She told me to take the rest of the day off. I left the office, walking straight home. I didn't even check my phone. I already knew it was full of missed calls, voicemails, and messages from extended family. I had ignored a lot. I had blocked their numbers, cut off their access to my accounts, refused to respond to their online smears. But this, showing up at my workplace, trying to drag me out in front of my coworkers, this was the breaking point. They weren't going to stop. Not until I made them. Filing a restraining order wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do against my own parents, but after they showed up at my job, I knew I had no other choice. They weren't going to stop. They weren't going to respect boundaries. The only way to get them out of my life was to make it legally impossible for them to come near me again. I contacted a lawyer the next day. She listened to everything. How they harassed me, tried to access my mail, attempted credit fraud, called my job, and now physically showed up at my workplace to drag me out. She didn't even hesitate. This was more than enough for a restraining order. The paperwork moved fast. I filed for a temporary restraining order immediately. My lawyer assured me that based on everything they had done, there was a strong chance the judge would grant a permanent one. I signed the documents, and within days, my parents were served. I don't know what I expected their reaction to be, but I wasn't prepared for how fast they retaliated. At first, they tried to act surprised. They sent long, dramatic texts about how shocked they were that I would go to such lengths against my own family. Then came the guilt trips. My mom sent message after message about how I was breaking her heart, how she had given everything for me, how no other daughter would ever treat their parents this way. I blocked their numbers. That's when the extended family jumped in. Within hours, my inbox was filled with messages from aunts, uncles, and even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Every single one of them called me cruel and ungrateful. They repeated the same lines over and over, how my mother was sick with grief, how my father was devastated, how I was destroying my family for no reason. I ignored every single one. Then my mom found another way. An unknown number called. I answered without thinking. The second I picked up, I heard sobbing. She pleaded for me to drop the restraining order. She begged me to just talk to her, just once. She said she didn't understand what went wrong, that she missed me, that she just wanted her daughter back. I hung up and blocked the number. That's when they escalated. The next morning, my apartment manager called. She sounded hesitant, but told me that my parents had contacted the office, claiming I was mentally unstable and needed a wellness check. They asked if the building could grant them access to check on me. I told her the truth, that I had a restraining order against them, that they had been harassing me for months, that they were lying. She assured me that they wouldn't be allowed in. A few hours later, the cops showed up. They knocked, and I opened the door, already knowing why they were there. One of the officers asked if I was okay, if there was anything wrong. They had received a report from my concerned parents saying I was in distress and might harm myself. I calmly explained everything. I told them about the harassment, the restraining order, and how this was just another manipulation attempt. I even showed them the legal documents. The officers nodded. They understood. They left without issue, but I knew this wasn't the last time my parents would try something. That night, my phone blew up again. My parents had now spread a new story to the family that I had joined a cult. They claimed I had been brainwashed by dangerous people and cut off my entire family because of it. Then my friends started getting messages. My mom had somehow found some of them on social media. She sent long, frantic messages about how I was in danger, how I was being manipulated, how they needed to convince me to come home before it was too late. My friends sent me screenshots. They thought it was ridiculous, but I could see what my parents were doing. They were trying to isolate me. They were trying to make sure that even if they couldn't reach me, they could control how others saw me. Then I got an email from my landlord. It was a confirmation. Apparently, I had called earlier in the day to cancel my lease and was planning to move out next month. Except I never made that call. My parents had called, pretending to be me, and tried to get my lease terminated. I immediately called my landlord and told him everything. That my parents were impersonating me. That they were fraudulently trying to mess with my living situation. I updated my security details and put a password on my account so that only I could make changes. Then I filed another police report. That's when my dad finally snapped. A new email appeared in my inbox. From him. He told me I would regret this. That they weren't going to just sit back and let me destroy my life. That I had no idea what I was doing. And that they would make sure I paid for this mistake. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. I told her I wanted to move forward with full legal no contact. Enough was enough. I was finally starting to feel like I had the upper hand. The restraining order was in place, my landlord knew about my parents' tricks, and I had locked down every account and document they could possibly try to mess with. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of someone at my front door. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe a neighbor coming home late, maybe the wind. But then I heard it again, metal against metal. The slow, careful sound of someone messing with the lock. I sat up, heart pounding. I grabbed my phone, creeping toward the peephole. My dad was standing there. His back was slightly turned, but I could see his hands fiddling with the lock. He was trying to break in. I backed away immediately and dialed 911. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. I gave them my address and told them exactly what was happening. The operator told me to stay inside, stay quiet, and wait for officers to arrive. I didn't move. Through the peephole, I saw my dad pull something from his pocket. A tool. A lockpick. He was actually trying to break in. The minutes dragged. Then, suddenly my dad stopped. He looked up like he had just realized something. Then he turned to my mom, who had been standing by their car the entire time. They exchanged a few words, then he rushed back toward her. They were trying to leave. I told the 911 operator they were heading to their car. She told me officers were almost there. I heard the sound of tires screeching, just as flashing red and blue lights appeared at the end of the street. The police pulled up just in time to block their exit. Two officers stepped out, shining their flashlights directly into the car. My mom was crying, already launching into whatever story she had prepared. My dad kept his hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I opened my door just a little, staying inside but close enough to hear. One officer approached my dad's window and asked what they were doing there. My dad, without missing a beat, said they were just checking on me. That they had been so worried, and when I didn't answer my phone, they thought something had happened. The officer asked why he was messing with my door. My dad said he thought it was unlocked and was just trying to get inside to check on me. The officer wasn't buying it. He turned to me, asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't hesitate. I told him about the restraining order, about the months of harassment, about how this wasn't concerned parents, this was stalking, plain and simple. That was all they needed to hear. The officers told my parents to step out of the car. My mom started sobbing louder, clutching my dad's arm. My dad refused at first, trying to argue, but when the officer pulled out the handcuffs, he finally obeyed. They were arrested on the spot. As the cops put them in the back of the car, my mom kept crying about how I was ruining their lives. My dad didn't say a word. The officers told me I could go inside, that they'd be in touch. I locked the door, but I didn't sleep. I just sat there staring at the wall, waiting for the next call. It came the next morning. My brother sent me a link. My parents' mugshots were on the county arrest records. I stared at the screen. My dad looked furious. My mom looked exhausted, her face streaked with dried tears. Then my phone started ringing again. The extended family had seen it too. My voicemail filled up with messages. Some were furious, blaming me for destroying the family. Others were more subtle, trying to convince me that I had gone too far. That pressing charges against my own parents was cruel and unforgivable. I didn't answer a single call. Then came the voicemail from my parents. They had been released on bail. My mom was sobbing, begging me to drop the charges. My dad, for the first time, sounded exhausted. No anger, no threats. Just a low, quiet voice telling me that I didn't have to do this, that I could still fix things. I sent the voicemail to my lawyer. She told me exactly what I needed to hear. Don't cave. Don't respond. Let the case move forward. So I did. The charges stuck. Trespassing and attempted unlawful entry. They were officially in the system now. For the first time, they were actually facing real consequences. And for the first time, I was truly free. The court date arrived faster than I expected. My lawyer had already warned me. My parents were going to try every trick they could to make themselves look like victims. I had to stay calm, stick to the facts, and not let their theatrics get to me. My brother showed up that morning, standing beside me outside the courtroom. He was ready to testify. He knew exactly what our parents were like, and he had experienced their manipulation firsthand. He didn't hesitate when I asked if he would support me. When we entered the courtroom, my parents were already seated at the defendant's table. My mother's face was streaked with fresh tears, clutching a tissue like she had already won sympathy points. My dad sat rigid, jaw tight, avoiding eye contact. Their lawyer whispered something to them before the judge entered. The hearing started, and my parents wasted no time. The second they were allowed to speak, my mother broke into sobs, claiming they had only been worried about me, that they had no idea why I was doing this to them. She said they had tried everything to reach me, but I had cut them off so suddenly that they had no choice but to check on me themselves. The judge remained unmoved. He asked if they were aware of the existing restraining order. My dad spoke up, saying that they never meant to break the law, that it was all just a misunderstanding. Then his tone shifted. He looked directly at me and told the judge that I was being manipulated, that I had never been this way before, that someone had filled my head with lies. His voice grew louder, more desperate. My lawyer remained calm. She waited until he finished and then presented the evidence. Text messages, emails, call logs, police reports. She laid it all out. The credit fraud attempt, the harassment, the impersonation at my workplace, the night they showed up at my apartment and tried to break in. Every detail documented and undeniable. The courtroom was silent. Then my mom pulled her final act. She clutched her chest suddenly, gasping. Her breathing became shallow, her face pale. The entire courtroom watched as she dramatically leaned against my dad. Her lawyer jumped up, saying she was having a panic attack. The judge didn't flinch. He signaled to security, and within seconds, an officer escorted her out of the courtroom for a medical check. The judge called for a short recess, but it was clear he wasn't buying it. When court resumed, my parents' lawyer tried a different angle. He admitted that maybe they had crossed some lines, but insisted they were just concerned parents, that they never meant any harm, that this shouldn't be turned into something bigger than it needed to be. Then the judge looked at me. He asked if I wanted to move forward with extending the restraining order, if I wanted to keep my parents out of my life for good. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. The judge took a moment, then delivered his final decision. The restraining order was extended for 5 years. I wasn't expecting 5 years. Maybe 1, maybe 2. But 5? That meant 5 full years of legal protection, 5 years where they couldn't come near me, 5 years of peace. My parents sat frozen. My dad's hands clenched into fists. My mom, back in the courtroom now, looked completely drained, as if she had just realized she lost. As we got up to leave, my dad turned to me. He leaned in just enough for me to hear and whispered, "You'll regret this." My mom, eyes red and swollen, tried one last time. She reached out, voice shaking, and said, "You don't have a mother anymore." I didn't stop walking. I stepped out of that courtroom and into the hallway, feeling lighter than I had in years. It was over. For now, moving to another state was the final step. After everything, years of control, harassment, court battles, restraining orders, I needed to disappear completely. I packed up, left my apartment behind, and started over. No forwarding address, no goodbyes, no social media updates, just a clean break. My brother was the only one who knew where I was. He promised not to tell anyone. He was done with them too. The new city felt like freedom. I got a new job, better pay, better hours, and most importantly, no ties to my past. I made new friends, built a new routine, and for the first time, it felt like I was truly free. I was careful. My address wasn't listed anywhere. I used a P.O. box for official mail. I changed my phone number so they couldn't reach me. Even distant family members, people I hadn't spoken to in years, started trying to message me. I blocked them all. I wasn't taking any chances. Then, one afternoon at work, my boss pulled me aside. Someone had called the office looking for me. I knew before he even said it. My mother. She had told the receptionist that she was my emergency contact and that she needed to speak with me immediately. She wouldn't say what the emergency was, just that it was urgent. My boss asked if I wanted to return the call. I told him no. After everything, after the restraining order, after the arrests, after the judge had ruled in my favor, they had still found me. I went home that night and checked everything. My accounts, my security settings, my online presence. There were no leaks, no addresses connected to my name. Then I got my answer. My old landlord called. He had something to tell me. My parents had hired a private investigator. They had paid someone to track me down. They knew where I lived. They knew where I worked. They knew everything. My stomach dropped. They had stalked me across state lines. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer. I wanted to know if this violated the restraining order. He said it was a gray area. Technically, hiring a private investigator wasn't illegal, but using that information to contact me was. My boss backed me up completely. He told the receptionist that anyone claiming to be my family should be shut down immediately. No calls, no messages, nothing. Then I got the final call. Unknown number. I answered. My mother was sobbing. She asked me why I hated them, why I was doing this, how I could throw away my own family. She begged me to come back. She said they just wanted to talk, that they had forgiven me. I hung up. Then I blocked the number. It wasn't over. Not after the restraining order. Not after the arrests. Not after moving to a different state. As long as they knew my legal name, they could always find me. That was the last connection. The last thread tying me to them. So I cut it. I met with my lawyer and told him I wanted to change my name. Not just a casual name change, a full legal identity change with sealed records. He didn't even blink. He had seen enough of my case to know why I was doing this. The process wasn't simple. It took weeks of paperwork, court filings, and legal approvals. My lawyer guided me through every step, making sure that once it was done, there would be no loopholes. My parents wouldn't be able to search public records, wouldn't be able to hire another private investigator, wouldn't be able to track me down ever again. When the paperwork was finalized, I walked out of that courthouse as a different person. No one could take that from me. I went through every financial and personal record, updating everything to reflect my new identity. Bank accounts, job records, medical documents, rental agreements, everything. I even switched to a new phone provider, making sure that not even my number could be traced back to my old life. The final step was erasing my online presence. I deleted every old social media account, wiped any trace of my previous name from the internet, and created new, locked down profiles that only my closest friends had access to. It was like I had never existed before. My friends celebrated the moment with me. They called it my witness protection arc, joking that I was finally free from the world's worst reality show. We had a small gathering, just the people who had been with me through all of it. No drama, no stress, just laughter, drinks, and a night where I didn't have to look over my shoulder. There was only one thing left to do. I sat down and wrote a final letter to my parents. I told them they would never find me again, that I wasn't their puppet, their property, or their obligation, that I was done. I didn't send it. I burned it. My lawyer helped me set up legal alerts in case they ever tried to pull something again. If they filed anything against me, tried to contact me through the courts, or attempted to interfere in my life in any way, I would know immediately. A few days later, my brother sent me one last message. Proud of you. They'll never find you now. And then, silence. For the first time in years, no calls, no emails, no messages, nothing. I stared out at the city that night, breathing in the quiet. No more games, no more manipulation, no more running. This time it was over. I blocked every unknown number, just in case. Then I walked away, knowing I was finally free.